Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Chase Jarvis, the founder of CreativeLive and your host for the next 60 to 90 minutes, where we get to sit down with a very inspiring guest, someone I've been excited to have on the show for some time. And added bonus, we've been friends for, I don't know, I'm calling it maybe a decade and a half. So we're going to get to air some laundry, share some stories. But before we cut to the guests for this morning's program, I want to welcome you wherever you are across the world joining us. I do want to let you know that I see your comments and your questions, whatever platform you're streaming on. If you're at creativelive.com/TV, I see those questions first. If you join chat in the upper right-hand corner, press that button. I will be able to see your comments and forward any questions you have. Of course, I'll be curating those for our guest. And the same is true for Facebook and YouTube Live and Instagram Live. I do want to welcome you. Feel no obligation to go over to creativelive.com/TV, but I will get your comments and happy to include you in the conversation. Also, today is exciting for me for a number of reasons because, I referenced that I've been wanting to have this guest on for a long time. It's at the confluence of so many things that we value at CreativeLive here. This person is multidisciplinary, and before I get into his bio, part of what I want you to think about as you're asking questions here is, what would you want to know from this person? If you could sit down and have one question answered, I find that I've been asking my fans and readers to focus their question on something they'd actually want to know. And over the past couple of broadcasts, that's really sharpened the pencil and created some amazing conversation with my guests. So as you are letting me know where you're coming in from all over the place, be sharpening your pencil and thinking about a question that you would ask this guest if you were able to sit down with him one-on-one. Speaking of guests, it's probably time to bring him on. My guest is Nabil Ayers. Now, he is the GM of the Beggars group music label 4AD. In layperson terms, if you don't know much about labels, that's the label behind some of my favorite bands like The National, Big Thief, Grimes, Future Islands, St. Vincent, and they've also done things like reissued Pixies albums, Doolittle, which was certified platinum in 2019. I have a great picture of my friend Nabil here handing the Pixies their platinum album. After opening Seattle's Sonic Boom record store at age 25, which is how we met here in Seattle, Nabil sold that to a longtime customer in 2016. What's not in his bio officially is that he's an incredibly talented musician. Among other things, he was a drummer in the Seattle band The Long Winters, which has been at the heart of the indie music scene here in Seattle for decades. And he's also been a guest performer on several albums, indie and major labels to boot. And as both an executive and an artist, he's not only performed on his own label, these various other labels, but he's also an amazing writer. And he has most recently written for the New York Times, NPR, GQ, and others about creativity, about race, about music. And I'm very excited. This is a precursor, if you will, because we're definitely going to have him on again next year when he releases his memoir, which he just signed with Viking Books. In 2021, that's coming out. So please, wherever you are in the world, tap your keys, raise your hand, send some emojis, and welcome Mr. Nabil Ayers to the show. Nabil, welcome, bud.
Thank you. What an intro.
Yeah, 9.5 minutes of just bliss and praise.
Well, we've got a lot of years behind us.
We do. And you look good. It's nice to see you.
Thanks. I mean, I'm in California, so, I feel good.
Normally in Brooklyn, right? We were just, as we were chatting, you were saying you had to get out of Brooklyn, and LA's been really nice. What's the pandemic been like for you?
It's been weird. I mean, just like everybody else. I mean, my wife and I are lucky to be healthy and employed and very fortunate for that. But, we live in a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, so it got really cramped once we started working from home. So we have family in Los Angeles, a lot of friends, and there's a lot of space here. So we were lucky enough to brave the flight, which was not that bad, and now we're just sort of laying low in a different, more spacious place, and it's nice.
Did you guys get out early? So many of my friends that are in NYC just like they tried to bear it for like a month just in case they didn't have to shut the place down, and then by like early April, everyone was wigging out.
Yeah, no, we wigged out. We got out late. We've only been gone a week, so it's been pretty crazy. But we're still
Oh.
getting along. It's a great test. I mean, it could be worse.
Yeah, and
But
congratulations. I was scrolling through your IG feed a while ago, maybe 2 weeks ago or so, when we set up this broadcast, and was just looking at some photographs from your wedding of you and Allie, and man, congratulations. We haven't spent
thanks.
that much time since you
Yeah.
guys together since you guys tied the knot.
Right.
Your photographer crushed it. I don't either that you guys are like
Thanks.
some of the most photogenic people in the world, but
It's a combination of the two, right? There's a funny thing. I remember the last time we hung out it was my wife, now wife AJ, was my girlfriend at the time. You were in New York, and the three of us went to dinner and kind of just like did the town and went to a bunch of bars and everything. And we kept running into celebrities. I think like what people think always happens in New York and LA, but doesn't that often, really did happen to us. And we were at the bar in the Bowery Hotel, and
St. Vincent
we ran into St. Vincent. Right, she came up to us, which was even
it's like,
cooler, and obviously
exactly. And I
yeah,
was like, oh my
that
gosh,
was
that's St.
amazing.
Vincent. And
But
she didn't
then-
like, it wasn't just like a walk by. She like sat down and hung out for like 30 minutes, and we're like, hey, we got to go.
Yeah. But we were at that Japanese restaurant where we had dinner, where Patti Smith is known to eat, so it's not that odd that she would be there, and of course she was. But the weirdest part about all this, that I'm maybe taking it too far by connecting it to anything, is someone was walking out behind me. I couldn't tell because I couldn't see him, but he pointed over my shoulder at my wife and said, "Are you ready for the revolution?" And then he walked out, and it was Jake Gyllenhaal. And now here we are,
Do you remember that?
the revolution. Yeah.
We are. And he was standing right there, and he smiled at me and stopped. And I'm like,
Right.
why is Jake Gyllenhaal stopping at our table?
Yeah.
And he literally then points at AJ and was like, you ready for the revolution? And I was like, what just happened? Anyway,
I don't know
that
if
was
he answered, but
I don't remember. Do you remember?
no.
Anyway,
Yeah.
random. That was such a great night. What's the name of that sushi joint? You don't say it out loud probably because it's gonna overrun with people.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'll tell you after.
Okay, yeah, I want to. It's on my list.
Mhm.
Well, there's so many different ways we can take our conversation. That's
Yeah.
a sign of some of my favorite conversations of all time. My favorite guests are ones like yourself, where we can literally talk about your career as an artist, your life as an entrepreneur, your curatorial skills, your adventure, given, having traveled the world, living bi-coastal, the intersection of working with so many amazing talents, like just osmosis and being around incredible humans. You tick so many metaphorical boxes for people that I like to spend time with, and that the world, again, I'm just seeing people chiming in here from speaking of the world from all over. We've got Auckland, we've got there's always some South Africa in the house, London, Cincinnati, Ohio wants to know they're in the house.
The national.
But I find that the questions that I could ask you cover such a broad spectrum. But I want to go, since we are in a very unique time, I want to start at maybe a different spot than I would normally start out. And I think I can do this because we're longtime buddies, and we're just sipping coffee here on a Tuesday morning. You've recently written a handful of pieces about race and music, the New York Times, NPR, and every once in a while you'll text me one of these things, and they've just been stunning. And I think you have a really unique perspective, and I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what you've been writing and why.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm trying to think. If I take it back, I mean, I was a terrible student, which I think is an interesting thread to all of this, but it makes more sense now. I got terrible grades in high school, was lucky enough to get into a good college somehow still. I went to the University of Puget Sound, which is in Tacoma, just outside of Seattle. Also did fairly poorly there, but while I did poorly in school, I discovered what I was really into, which was DJing on the college radio station, playing in bands, putting on shows, doing all these things that my friends thought were silly, but now, they're lawyers and doctors, and I'm doing this, and it turns out we all knew what we were doing. So So there's that, but weirdly in college, the 2 A's that I got, and I only got 2 A's, were in writing classes. And it wasn't because I worked harder because they were more important. It was just because I really enjoyed them and it felt like it came naturally and it was fun and I loved it. So that was kind of that. And then that went away for a while. Then I graduated from college and started working in a record store and played in bands and did all the stuff I wanted to do, which was great. And when I was in one of these bands, a band called The Lemons in Seattle, and this is like 1995, I think, we got arrested in the middle of the desert with a bunch of pot in our van. And I didn't even smoke pot. It wasn't mine, but I was in possession. Whole thing handcuffed. It's a really long, crazy story that I won't get into now. But since then, I started telling it all the time and telling it in great detail because there's so many weird ins and outs. And I really enjoyed telling it and people enjoyed hearing it. And I always meant to write it. In my head, I was like, well, I like writing and I have this story. Wouldn't it be fun to write it just for the hell of it? But I never did. And then out of the blue, 4 or 5, maybe 4 years ago, I was on a flight to London from New York. It was really long. No internet, didn't want to do work, wasn't tired, didn't want to watch movies. And I was like, I think now is the time. I'm just going to start writing that story and not think about the audience or who might read it. No one might ever read it. I just want it to exist. And that's the whole reason I did it. And that allowed me to really sort of pull back the insecurity of the fact that someone might see it or judge it. So I really just wrote it as if I were telling it, which I'd done so many times. And I ended up really just typing and typing for the whole flight. And then the whole time in London, I would stay up really late because I was jet lagged and I kept going. And when I got back, I'd written 80 or 90 pages, which was just crazy to me. It was, it was long and it was detailed, and I'd gotten into, earlier parts and why I was in this band and who these people were and everything. And it was just so fun. And I still didn't want to show it to anyone. I was like, this is not refined at all. I don't even know what this is, but I know there's something happening in me suddenly where this just feels fun and natural and I want to keep doing it. So the only thing I could think to do at that point was take a writing class. So I'm in New York. It was easy to find something. I did like a, Monday nights, 7 to 10 people of all ages and races sitting in a room with one teacher who basically just forced us to write and read a lot every week. And a lot of stuff started to come out through that. And that led to me kind of shoving aside that band story and getting more into shorter things. And really the catalyst was around that same time, my partner and I, Jason, sold Sonic Boom, our record store in Seattle. And I'd written a bunch of Sonic Boom stories just about the crazy things that happen in a record store, especially in the early days, really fun
through
times.
Seattle.
And,
wow.
So finally I was like, this is a weird moment. And it really, I don't know how else to explain it, except it just all felt very natural and obvious to me. I was like, now is the time I think I could maybe get away with trying to publish something because I have a reason. Up till that point, it felt very egotistical, maybe that's the word, to be like, what, I'm just going to write about myself and put it out there and people are supposed to care. But in a weird way, Sonic Boom, even though it was ours, kind of felt like it belonged to all of our customers and to Seattle and a lot of people. And the story was about all of that. And so I talked to Sean Nelson, who was the music editor at The Stranger, the sort of alternative weekly in Seattle, and just said, we're selling the store. I'd love to publish a short piece that's just kind of a historical My Days at Sonic Boom. Do you want to see it? And he's just like, yes, I'll run it. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah.
No, you have to read it first. And he's like,
yes.
Nope.
and I remember feeling just terrified. And you know that feeling of like, really, I've played in bands for years and we can get into all this, but I was always the drummer, which to me was never putting myself out there. The singer, the person up front with the microphone who wrote the words and talked about their feelings, that was the person putting themselves out there. And suddenly I felt more like that person. I was terrified, but they ran it and it went great. And I got really great feedback from people. And so that's really what kind of got it started, was having a reason and realizing it's okay to kind of tell stories.
Well, I love the way that you just got into this narrative, because you just retraced your emotional arc for putting something, especially something in a new area, a new discipline that you hadn't really been. And let's just, for people who are watching and listening, and again, chiming in from all over the world, I want to say hi to everybody out there. Please keep sharing your comments. I will forward some on to Nabil here. But what it has gone unsaid is that you're incredibly talented at everything you touch. And so it's not surprising to me that you could be an amazing entrepreneur, start this iconic record store in Seattle, have a esteemed career as a musician, play in some critical bands. And so, of course, it seems to me that anything you touch, you'd be good at. But I want to retrace your personal journey. Did you feel like you were good? Did you feel like this had merit? Were you judging yourself? Like, let's go one layer deeper, because right now,
Right.
I mean, let me give you the why behind the question. Right now, there are, let's just say 1,000 people who are listening or watching, and they've all got something inside themselves. They're good at something in life, and they know they're good at something. They don't, maybe that it's something that culture doesn't value, or maybe there's a little bit of resentment, or maybe they're pursuing their dream, but they've burned out a little bit and they want to do something different. And so let's just say there's 1,000 people who are listening or watching that have that feeling. And I was hoping that you could talk about your experience as if you're talking to them.
Right. I mean, yeah, I was in a lucky position, and I feel like I have been, because I've always sort of juggled a bunch of plates. And so however you look at it, when Jason and I owned Sonic Boom, I played in bands. When I played in bands, I owned Sonic Boom. I also had my own small record label where I put out records by bands I really liked. But Sonic Boom, I guess, that's what I did for a living. So it allowed me to be in a band and to take more risks there, or to put out records by a band I really loved that I might lose a couple $1,000s on, but I wasn't making a living from that. So it was okay. So I've always been really lucky in that perspective, in that whatever my next thing has been, it's not like I'm going to quit my job and do this. I don't think I've really ever done that, except when I moved to New York. I guess I did, but there's always been that little bit of a safety net, and that I'm not putting all of my eggs in this basket. But
that's the unsung narrative that actually, if you ask 1,000 entrepreneurs, everybody thinks the entrepreneur is like, okay, I'm going all in and bet it all on black.
Right.
Roll the dice, take the second mortgage out.
Right.
From everybody from yourself to Richard Branson and everybody in between, it's like, no, I had this going on the side. There were side bets, and they were small, and I was getting up courage, and okay, this is helpful. Keep going.
So that's really made me feel more secure, and I guess in the risks that I've taken. But yeah, there is this. Writing was really the thing that, like, the sort of emotional investment was there, where even the Sonic Boom thing, which that story that I published in The Stranger is just mostly just funny stuff about whatever. Fred Durst came in the store, and there were all these rock stars, and we split Thai food for lunch because we had no money, but it wasn't deeply personal. But what happened after that was I just kept writing, and I was taking these classes, and of course they really push you to write more personal things. And so I was doing all that, again, thinking no one would ever see it, or no one had to see it. And my wife, who is a longtime writer, knew I was doing that. She hadn't even seen a lot of it, but she's like, look, the Sonic Boom thing is great. The stuff you're publishing is great. She's like, that's what people really want to hear. And when you're really going to get somewhere is when you start talking about yourself and go a layer deeper and talk about the more serious personal stuff, because you've had an interesting life and people would appreciate that. And that was a 30-second conversation. And that's what pushed me to really think, okay, I should talk about race and my childhood, not things that I wouldn't say I had a hard life, but I think I had an interesting life. And so doing that was much harder, and really felt like I was sort of exposing myself and revealing myself. But I guess to an extent it's working, or it's worked. And the biggest risk is seriously, at least with this particular thing, and with a lot of things, I think, for the people who are listening, is, why would anyone care what I have to say? That's the self-conscious thing that I think a lot of us have, that most people have in some respect, is I can say this and I can live it, but for me to just write it down or film it or do whatever it is and put it out there for people to judge, why would anyone care? Or are they just going to tear me down?
I think we're living in a culture now that's increasingly curious, because we have a lens on lives that we never had before. Just think about vlogging. Like, Casey Neistat carried a camera around every day and put a video every day for 5 years of his life. That's like bonkers, right? Yet that single-handedly propelled him from, I would call it just a relatively, let's say a filmmaker. He did some stuff with HBO, but to, someone who is a leader in the creative industry, and created a new living and life for him. And so if so many people are conscious, like, what do I have to say? Why me?
Right.
What were your answers to yourself around those questions? Why you?
Right. Right.
Why, why you?
I think I'm still learning, but at least it's been positive as I go. And I think each time I put another thing out there, this positive reinforcements exist. And the weird thing is, so the first thing that I put out there that felt very personal was after I had that conversation with my wife was this statement, I guess, is there's no better way to put it. I wrote a piece about sort of my racial identity and my feelings. And my father, very simply, my father is black, my mother is white. Grew up with my mother in very diverse and then mostly white surroundings. Never really had a black influence in my life, but I'm half black. And I wrote this piece that kind of is just about that. And I'm not even sure what the thesis is. It's more just that I've been lucky and it's okay. And I have this identity, and thought about where to pitch it, which I'd never done really, other than this piece of Luck and the Stranger. And NPR has a vertical called Code Switch, which is an incredible podcast. It's about race. And so those are the first people I pitched, and I just found the sort of generic pitch us email, and they were nice enough to get back to me and to say no. And
they were very sweet, very kindly said no to me.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of the time you just don't hear anything. Most of the time with things like when you're just cold emailing somebody. But weirdly, that was encouraging even just to hear from them and to know, and it was a person. And I was like, oh, cool. Well, now I know for the next thing, now I have a person's email address and I can, now I have a contact there, sort of built the positive from that. And so I wasn't sure where to go from there, but there's a website that I really like called The Root, which is much more sort of black voices, black culture, whereas Code Switch is simply about race, but I think it kind of caters to everyone, where The Root is more of a black site. And I think the only reason that I pitched The Root so quickly was simply because the editor-in-chief's email was sitting there on the site. And so I thought, great, hello, I have this piece. And she emailed right back and said, I'd love to read it. And then she emailed right back and said, I'm going to run it Saturday. And that's, The Stranger is one thing. Oh, I'm going to write about my record store and it's going to happen. But this was like, oh shit, now my sort of weird life story that I'm not sure how people are going to react to is going to exist. And it's going to exist, I knew this ahead of time. I was like, it's a pretty black site. And I think some black people are going to be unhappy with my position that, hey, I'm racially mixed, but it hasn't been that hard for me, which, if I'm really putting in a nutshell, has kind of been some of the lucky part of my life. So that was really, really hard. I was really scared. They edited it, we edited it together, but not very heavily. It kind of came out how I wrote it. And the thing that propelled me more than anything in my writing were when that came out and the comments, which were brutal. They were terrible. People don't leave nice comments because that's not what the internet is. It was, maybe 20 or so comments that were kind of what I just said, like, oh, lucky you, you should hear my story. My life is fucking sucked, blah, blah, blah. And that's terrible, and I feel bad for those people, but people are really cutting into me and digging into me and making it personal. And I got this weird feeling that I was like, oh, I can write things and it can make people feel a certain way. And I'm not, my goal is not to make people feel bad, but my goal is to sort of instill something. And we say this a lot at 4AD, which is a whole different thing in music. If everyone likes everything we're putting out, it feels like we're doing something wrong. Usually the things that do well are the things that, 75% of the people we send it to early like, and then 25% say, I don't know, this is weird, or I don't like this, or I hate this. And those are the things that work. And this is what this felt like all of a sudden. That's kind of when I knew I had something.
Okay, two threads, two directions I want to take this. Yeah. One, were you reassured? Do you think that history that you had in putting out music and getting that 75-25 split and understanding that, did that help propel you in this time of doubt? Was that a muscle that you'd sort of conditioned?
I think so, yeah, because I remember immediately making that connection in my brain. I hadn't made it until I was reading these comments. And of course, I literally felt it physically in my stomach and in my chest. I was like, ugh. But then I was able to separate and be like, these people don't hate me. They don't know me. They have their own feelings, and this is bringing up those feelings for them. And I hope they figure out a way, they should write their story too, or they should do something. But yeah, that's the moment when I made that connection. So I think you're right. I think it did give me a weird perspective and experience to draw from.
Okay, keep pushing though. You put this out there. And but this, I'm also, I want to like signpost for a second. Where I'm going with this is, you were a music guy in my head, like music guy, creator, entrepreneur, having started the record store. And when you sent me the original piece I think the first piece that you sent me was New York Times piece.
Right.
And I was like, whoa, this is so good. And I had no idea.
Right.
But to me, that's part of this beauty and my curiosity around these things is, again, going back to whoever's watching and listening right now, there are thousands of people and you have an idea in your head and people don't know you as this or think about it. And is it fair to say this is an opportunity? Like you've got nothing to lose? Like what was part of your psychology around putting this out? Did you feel like you had something to lose, but you had, because it was a day job, and did you feel like you could lose this because your day job?
Right.
Just orient us.
Yeah, I mean, my job was never a concern. I mean, my thing about writing, when I started to tell friends and people I was writing, of course, everyone was always like, "Oh, you're gonna write about music. You're gonna write about the music business." And I was like, "No, that sounds boring. That's what I do, and I love my job, but it's not literally my life, even though my whole life has been built on that. Strangely, there are other dimensions that I'm not exploring, and that's what this is for to me. And some of it is absolutely connected to music, but it's different than that. So no, my job was, my boss was supportive of that original piece, and that's never been a concern. But the concern is simply, what will people think, and what will those close to me think, way more than these commenters on the internet. I'm never going to see them. Who cares? What'll my friends, my coworkers, my mom, my wife, what'll all these people think? And everyone was really supportive. So that helped a ton. But I mean, I'm trying to think the other risks involved. I know the thing that was in my head, and I've never been good at figuring out that, seeing the road and seeing the map. So I wasn't doing this saying, I'm going to publish 8 pieces and then I'm going to write a book, and then all these things that actually ended up happening. And I think in the back of my mind, maybe I did know, but I was more taking it as it came, and I was definitely pushing it. Suddenly felt like something, once you published a thing or two, I don't know how else to compare it. It felt like kind of being in a band, and the sort of fun and attention that comes from it, and people saying nice things. There was a lot about it that reminded me of, because I hadn't played in the band in probably 10 years, of getting off the stage every night and people saying, good job. It was a version of that. So that was part of what was propelling me. But the risk was definitely just in what people would think and where I was going with it, and the fear of, I think then, even early on, I knew that I wanted to write a book, and I would write a book, but I wasn't saying it yet because I was afraid to say that to somebody in case I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And there's a huge takeaway for people who are listening. And speaking of listening, I want to give a shout out to Carol in Scotland, and Michelle in Irving, Texas, and we got Tamara in Buffalo, Minnesota. I don't know, those sound like two different places to me, but it says Buffalo, Minnesota, USA. Abby, Michelle, anyway, people tuning in from all over the world. I want to give you all a shout out. And this idea of writing for yourself, taking some risks, but recognizing that the risks are small, especially there's I think a brilliant insight in that the haters are not actually hating you.
Right.
It's really about them. And that combination of a little bit of courage, not too much planning, a little bit of action, and a little bit of realizing that the world, the people that are going to respond are not the ones that are actually on your short list, and that when your short list is responding with encouragement, these are your parents, your peers, your friends, your wife, your partner, your spouse. Like, that is just such a powerful combination, and I feel like it's available to so many people.
Right.
And yet here we are. There's the reason that thousands of people are watching and listening to this is because there's something that's still in the way. So that makes me want to, I want to keep pulling on that thread in a second. I want to go down. You've written more extensively about race since then, and I want to keep tracing on that. It's so powerful in the time that we're in right now. But I want to go back and say, how much do you attribute this to being around, putting yourself around if you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, putting yourself around creators, entrepreneurs, risk takers, what role has that played for you?
Yeah, that's 110% of it. I think, weirdly early on, I think I knew that, and I hate the term creative people, but you know what I mean. I mean, I've always been to. I was born in New York City. My first school was an elementary school in Amherst, Massachusetts. That was I forget what it was called, but it was basically part of UMass's education school. It was like an experimental elementary school.
Wow.
The classrooms themselves, there was a second story that was all mirrors that you could see from the classroom, but you couldn't see what was behind them. And what was behind them were grad students plugging in headphones, watching all the classes, and sort of studying how it worked, I guess. And I was there from first to fourth grade, and it was incredible. We never had homework. It was but super smart kids, super international, because so many professors' kids were there, and people from all over the world would study for a couple of years. So really fascinating, interesting place that I loved. And then we moved back to New York City, where I was born, and I went to this school called Little Red Schoolhouse, which is this sort of famous school that was like a communist school back in the day, and where Angela Davis and all these people went. Same thing, really interesting, forward-thinking, experimental school. And that was kind of my base. So I think without trying and without even realizing it, I was always around a really big mix of interesting people, and that had to have rubbed off on me. But then in sixth grade, we moved to Salt Lake City, Utah. My mom worked for American Express, and they moved there, and we did it, and that was the opposite. That was a very normal, straight, the most normal place I'd ever been in my life, and I was there sixth grade through high school. But weirdly, I loved it, and I think at that point I had enough of a base that I still gravitated towards. I mean, I'm friends with a lot of those people who were just as smart and interesting and creative. And then from there, I think you just naturally continue to gravitate towards those people. So I think that is a huge part of my life.
How much of that is conscious? Like, I want to spend more time with this person because they fire me up, and I want to spend less time with this other person because they don't.
Right. I don't know the number. Is it 50-50? I mean, it definitely is partially conscious. I mean, then I guess the markers are, what are these people wearing? What bands are they listening to? It might not be able to get deep in their heads when you're in sixth grade, but there are things that you can see that person is into football, and I'm not really into football, but that kid has a Minor Threat shirt on, so I think I'll talk to him. So it's conscious in a way.
Either I don't believe we've met. My name's Ian, and I'm from Minor Threat.
Right.
Ian K. Wow, legend. Well, I think this is a question that I'm thinking is out there in the world, and I probably should. There mostly are just praise and gratitude here from Chicago, from Barbados is in the house. Let you reason together, Yorkshire, England. But a question that I'm curious about is this something that if you can't identify it as a clear, obviously, yes, I'm gravitating toward this kid with the Minor Threat t-shirt, you sort of are 50-50 on that. What about now in your adult life? How precious are you with your time and your attention and your energy? I'll leave it at that.
Right. I mean, I guess a lot more precious now just because I have less of it, and it's pretty partitioned. I mean, I have my job, which takes a lot of time and energy, and I have my side thing, which takes a lot of time and energy, which is writing, and I have a family and friends and everything. So, I mean, do I spend a lot of time searching out new people? And that's something I actually wish I had more time for in my life, and I would love, and I live in New York, and a fascinating, diverse, interesting city. So I wish there was time to do more of that, but I don't think I do as much as I should.
No, that's fair, but I think it has a lot to do with setting up your ecosystem, right. And I think living in Brooklyn, working at a record label, pursuing writing on the, I mean, like, it's just the alchemy is all there, and it's I have a hard time reconciling the fact that if you live in Springfield, Illinois, and I'm just picking that, like, literally that was the only city that popped into my brain, and you live in the suburbs, and how do I cultivate this interesting life? Because Nabil, it's easy. You're
Sure.
of mixed race. You were raised playing music in bands, going to these amazing schools. And who am I? You know, I grew up white, middle class, born in the 80s. Parents are together. Like I don't have, I don't have it. I'm not saying it's mostly me, but there's a couple things that are not true there. But I'm just trying to like generic middle America. I had an easy, normal childhood, normal whatever that means. Why would anybody care what I had to write? Because there are a lot of people right now that are challenging themselves with that question.
Right, which is funny because on paper, I would be in the very hard position and you would be in the very easy position in the world, right? So it's weird that suddenly I'm in the advantageous position, but that's hard, and I mean, I don't really know the answer. It's, you know, I think there's always been this thing where people want an easy life until they realize that sometimes a more difficult or a less traditional life can often lead to a more interesting life if you can get through it.
Yeah.
And again, even though I have a really sort of non-traditional, interesting background, it's never seemed hard or bad for me. I mean, whatever, my family was poor and there are all these interesting things, but I had a great childhood and I loved it, so it was never hard. But yeah, how to do that if you're in middle America, not surrounded by a lot of interesting stuff? Maybe you move. Maybe that's the simple thing, which is easier said than done and can cost money and, you know, to uproot your life. But
well, let's look at. Are you panting, or is that a friend of yours nearby?
That's a dog. Let me get this dog out of here. Sorry.
I love it. I love it.
It's downfall.
Like, I want folks at home to know that
dog thinks we're playing.
It's warm where Nabil is, but it's not that warm. All right, let's go back. I promise we would go down that path and then come back to talk about what you've been writing about. You've been writing about race and race relations, your history being having a Black father and a white mother, in not just the NPR, which you mentioned earlier, but the New York Times. How did that happen? How did you move into that world of writing? And B, talk about the timing and the reception and your headspace around all this stuff, because we're dying to know.
Yeah, this is, I think, where it got interesting for me. And so I published the Sonic Boom piece in The Stranger, and then the very personal, sort of more race piece in The Root. And then, of course, I was like, great, what do I do next? Now, whatever, I'm out, for lack of a better term. I've said my grand statement and you know, opened myself up, and it felt great. So now I can do anything. Now I can talk more about race or about whatever I want to, and it's fine. So what's next? And I didn't necessarily know. I was still taking classes, still doing lots of, I guess, what's called free writing, where you just write and just, you know, no one's ever going to see it. It doesn't matter. And so the weird thing that I've learned, and it took me a while to figure it out, is to pay attention. Meaning there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot surrounding you every day. And as I started to think about writing, it wasn't about me deciding what to write about. It was about me paying attention to my surroundings and my world and picking from that. And so I think the next piece that I published, my wife, who's a financial planner, went to a convention in Dallas and invited me to come for a few days. I was like, yeah, it sounds great. Whatever, we'll eat food and hang out in a new city, and I'll just work at the hotel. So we went, and I ended up going to the Dallas State Fairgrounds, because it's just supposed to be this incredible, the Texas State Fair, right? Incredible Art Deco buildings. It's sort of a weird thing. And went to the African American Museum that's there. That's really amazing. And when you walk in one of the exhibits, I was the only person there. It was like a Tuesday afternoon. There's this huge Ku Klux Klan suit just sitting there, and there's all this history and things about it, and it really terrified me. And of course, as I was thinking about all this, I was like, think about it. This is the next thing. Write about it. Don't just walk away from this thinking, well, that was scary. Anyway, what's for dinner? So I went back to the hotel, or actually went to this restaurant, and immediately just sat down and started writing about it and turned it into this thing. You know, it became kind of a research project. It turns out one of the biggest Klan rallies in America ever was in that exact spot, and there's this really sort of dark history. about that exact space where I was that day. And so that was the next thing. And I ended up pitching that, I think, to a few places and again, getting rejected, but still just thinking, it doesn't matter. It's going to end up somewhere. So I'm just going to, you just keep going and you keep grabbing email addresses. And this is really, even though I was in New York and knew a lot of people, I did not know people in these circles. So I was still just cold emailing people and looking up websites and trying to find editors. And again, got lucky with this one with Huffington Post, and that ran. And so now, there's always, and you'll get this, Chase, there's always a business mind to this as well, which I've always had this kind of entrepreneurial thing. I love playing in bands. I also loved all the record company stuff of it, the business part. So with this, the writing itself, I guess, is the creative part, but what's also fun is the business end of it. So, I've never been one of those creators who's like, well, I can do the creative part, man, but then I don't know what to do. I need someone else to help with that. I mean, of course, it's great to have people to help, but I love both parts. So in my head, I was like, great, now I have this piece in The Stranger, I have this piece in The Root, and I have a piece in Huffington Post. So now I have these bylines, and that's something to tell the next person with the next thing. And so the New York Times thing, and that was definitely, I guess, my big break, came when my uncle, who I'm super close with, my mother's younger brother, is a jazz musician who made this really incredible sort of avant-garde jazz album called Valley of Search in 1975 when I was a toddler. And I've always loved that album. And it just felt like a good time to reissue it, strangely, that kind of music was coming back, and there are a lot of people getting into those old records, vinyl, of course. And so, he's alive and well and still plays music all the time. And so we talked about it and decided that I would reissue that record on my own label that summer. This is 2018. Sorry, I've got a dog panting again here. Get away. So we did that. And in the process, of course, there are all these photographs and all this music and all these memories were coming up from my childhood and that time and place and everything. And so, sorry about that.
No, it's all right, man. We're live. This
Just put him on camera.
This is what CreativeLive TV is about, right? Yeah. We're in your
dog's live.
Your porch.
Yeah. Oh, no barking, no.
That's next level.
There we go. Got rid of him. So to my point from earlier, I think I really was paying attention. It was like, okay, how do I turn this into more than a project of just putting out this record? I'm feeling really connected to my past right now, and just started writing about it. That was the easiest thing. Was I remember the apartment building where he lived and where this album was recorded and what it smelled like and what New York was like in 1975, even though I was a toddler. I remember so much of this. So I just started writing about it and got it to a point where I was like, I think this feels like a short piece that obviously has to be in a New York-centric outlet, and the Village Voice was going under. There weren't many at the time. And so, of course, in my head, I was like, well, the New York Times is the one, and that's the biggest one. And I got super lucky in that a friend who I talked to knew an editor there, and this didn't end up being a music piece at all. I mean, it's about my uncle's album, but to me, it's more about my childhood in New York and that time and place. So she talked to an editor who was in the Metro section, which was, the section with New York City stories, basically. And I remember her saying, like, he read it and he likes it. He thinks it's a bit inside baseball or something like that, meaning like it's, very too specific, maybe not wide enough for this audience, which I was like, fair enough. Sure, it's about,
It's about me.
75 in one apartment building that no one knows about, but, whatever. So that was kind of that. And then it just got into luck where I ran into another friend, told him that, and he said, oh, I know that editor. I'll drop him a note. And then I think maybe a week later, I got a call and he was like, hey, I want to run this. It's really great. And that was kind of it. And for a moment, it got really scary because it's like, there is this ethics thing at the New York Times and a lot of papers where, it's your uncle's album that you are releasing as a commercial product to sell, and you're writing about it for the New York Times. That might be a problem. Let me check. And I was so terrified for about 24 hours while he said, I want to run this, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to. But they came back. We changed enough in it that it doesn't sound like that. It's, it's referred to as a recording. And it came out, and that was incredible. And that felt like a big thing. And that was the moment where I decided to make a website. I'd always wanted to make one, but I was like, I'm not a writer until I have not only a handful of pieces, but one in a sort of major paper.
Yeah.
So that's where it all changed, where I was like, well, now I have, 4 or 5 things out, and one is in the New York Times. And that's, family members and friends, and everyone notices that.
I want to read something from an NPR piece for those folks who are not familiar with your work. I've never been a father, and I've never had a father. Though my dad and I live in the same city, our paths have never crossed. Occasionally, someone asks me how he's doing. It surprises me every time, and I usually respond with something like, quote, "You'd probably know better than I would," which feels confrontational and often leads to a slightly apologetic, less biting explanation of the fact that I've never known him. I hope I inherited his best qualities and missed out on his worst, but I can only guess what those qualities are. For much of my life, even my racial identity has been somewhat of a question. My mother, who is white, chose to have me and raise me on her own. My father is black, but because I never was a part of his life, I've never held a strong black identity, or I felt I belonged in any single race. I grew up in a diverse and liberal surrounding where if anyone asked, I was racially mixed, and that was fine. I'm often asked the question, "What are you?" And it goes on from there. But like this thought about identity,
Yeah.
is how important is that for you? How important is understanding who you are, where you're from, what's your DNA, like why the archaeological dig at this point in your life
Right.
on your own identity?
I think it has never been that important to me. And again, I think it's because even though I've technically been missing, I didn't know my father, my life felt very full, and I had a lot of great people surrounding me, and I always felt taken care of and safe and had a really happy childhood. So that something happened, I think, once I started writing, that I started exploring that part of my brain more, and it became more important. And I think 23andMe is obviously part of that, because it was so easy to find out more, just because I never knew much about my dad's side.
Yeah.
So it's only newly important to me. It's not like my whole life. I mean, I guess what I just said there is my whole life I've never known anything, but it didn't seem to matter for most of my life. But now it matters, I think maybe just because it's so easy to find out more.
There's such a powerful message embedded in there that, like, just through the act of writing, these things have sort of, they've I don't know, the layers of the onion have been, or you're actively peeling them back, rather.
Yeah.
Do you have a practice? Do you have a daily writing practice now? Like, what is your
I know people who do, and I don't, but it's interesting. I mean, I know your book starts with that Maya Angelou quote that I don't remember exactly what it is, but basically that you can't run out of creativity. The more you create,
use, the more you
create.
use, the more you have. Yeah.
And it feels like that. So every time I think, God, I don't know what to write about, again, I pay attention and something else comes up. So I don't have a daily practice. I try to sometimes, but I'm not as good at free writing. Basically just thinking I'm going to write for an hour every morning, no matter what it is, no matter how. I don't do that. I'm usually working on something specific, and sometimes I won't do it for a week and I'll come back to it, and I find that I'm sort of refreshed and in a better place. So I think the daily practice works really well for a lot of people, but not as well for me.
Well, I'm going to pull on another thread here. That's something we touched on a little bit earlier, and it has to do with the people you surround yourself with. I mean, clearly you have a long history of being around creators and entrepreneurs. You talked about that. You talked about even, in your young life as a student, being raised in an interesting school environment. Right now, there's somebody who's listening to this and saying, that doesn't describe that. Who are we featuring on the podcast?
So this is God, I'm actually forgetting their names. Callie and somebody else. They're crazy Spuds MacKenzie dogs. Need to get out of here. Go away. Sorry.
You know how microphones work? It sounds like they are on the mic. Like,
yeah, they're close. Anyway.
Well, right now, again, there's someone who's like, that's not me. You gave advice earlier, which was move.
Right.
I'm just wondering, it seems like that's prohibitive, and yet there's every single person has a story to tell. And what I am so enamored by with your world is that your story did not unfold till you're in your 40s, right? This is
right. It feels like it's just starting in a way. It's exciting in that way.
Yeah, and so there's this just hardcore judgment that I find in the creator entrepreneur community, because it's just constant like comparison to where other people were at whatever part in their career. And by this time, Lady Gaga had 22 number one, hits, and she'd starred in 3, films
Right.
and won 10 Grammys, and then you're just getting started. And yet, this is one of the reasons I was very excited to have you on the show. You've had a very successful career as an entrepreneur and as a musician, and now you're entering a completely new phase as a writer, where you're almost going back to square one. How much of what you've learned along the way is being applied to this new endeavor? In short, what role did your mastery in one thing play in your ability to excavate an entirely new universe?
Right. I mean, I think everything leads to the next thing, right? I mean, it's, as much as there's this part of me, I mean, I'm 48 now, that thinks, of course there's like this fear of aging and like, I have to hurry up and do things because I don't want to be old still trying to do stuff. But on the other hand, I think it's exciting for me to sit here at 48 and think I've done a lot of cool things that I'm really excited about and am doing those things and proud of, but I'm not done. You always want to be pushing and doing new things and trying new experiences. That's what keeps life exciting. But yes, so much of what's happened in the past feeds what happens in the future and allows me to feel more comfortable taking risks. And when Jason and I opened Sonic Boom, we were 25 and we were both working for minimum wage at another record store at Easy Street, which is great in Seattle, and thought we should open our own record store. And that at the time was a huge risk. I mean, that's, we'd both gone to college. All of our friends were getting real jobs. That was a time in the 90s when it was pretty easy to get a real job, and all of our friends were, had expense accounts and wore suits and went to work, and they loved it. They were thrilled, and they took us out to dinner and everything. And I don't know how or what I would have done, but I suppose with my degree, I could have gotten a job out of college, but it just wasn't even, it's more than there was like a little voice in my head. There was a really loud voice in my head that was like, no, what you want to do is work in music and you also want to play in a band, and you can't get a real job because it'll prevent you from doing that. And I think that voice has always existed in some way, and it's not a voice, it's not like a magical thing, it's yourself knowing in a way what you're supposed to be doing and taking risks. And so now that voice says you have a great life and you're really lucky, and keep pushing and do different things. And knowing that most of the time that I've done that, it's worked, makes me feel better that it will continue to do so, I guess so.
Well, you just said the thing that I thought you might say, which is there's this trust and this sort of an inertia that the more you take a chance, and even if it doesn't go horribly wrong, if it's like a little bit bad, neutral, or good.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that. What role has trust played in your, and trust, the trust is not, maybe it's in the universe, maybe it's in your circle of friends, or maybe it's in yourself. What you tell me what role trust has played, if at all, and
I think,
and trust in what?
Right. With me, it's a trust in myself, and that I am capable of making good decisions for myself that will, that not, it won't always work. I mean, the interesting thing is that I know I've failed to do things. I know I've asked people for things and they've said no, whether it's trying to get a job or trying to get in a band or trying to publish a piece and having 5 people turn it down and 3 others not respond. But I don't remember those things. And I think and hope that's a healthy thing for me. It's like when you go to Vegas, most people lose money, but you remember the wins because those are fun and those are exciting, and whatever, winning that blackjack hand and everyone cheering, that's what you remember, even if you walk away, whatever, $500 in the hole. And it's a weird analogy, but it kind of makes sense for this, because those moments are blips when things haven't happened for me, and they absolutely exist. They're just not what I've chosen to focus on. What you do is you use those to try to do the next thing, or it sends you in a different direction and you refocus your energy. So the trust is absolutely the right term. And for me, it's just trust in myself that I can sort of take the information that exists and decide what to do with it and make it into something positive. Even if it's somebody turning me down for something, then you go to the next thing and try to make that work.
Amazing. How how much of the current BLM movement, the zeitgeist that we're all experiencing right now, has that played a role in giving you more courage, more optimism, more of a desire to put your take on race out into the public, or is there a side to that that is not obvious? Like how has this current time, how do you relate to this current time and
Right.
your writing?
Um, I mean, it became an obvious focus of my writing, I guess, obviously before this current moment, which is sadly only a month or so old right now. Really, once I started writing, that was a focus. So, but it certainly propelled it, and it's certainly part of it. I mean, the recent New York Times piece with Ed Eckstein, I mean, what that was, after all the George Floyd stuff and all these horrible things happening, there were these two women in the record industry who called for Blackout Tuesday, which was basically saying everyone in the music business should take this particular Tuesday off, sort of as a boycott, but also just to think and reflect and use it as a positive time to try to make change. And so my company did that, and I remember thinking, well, what should I do on that day? And the backstory is that Ed Eckstein was the president of Mercury Records, which is the label that my band The Lemons signed to back in the 90s, and he was the first ever black president of a major label in America, which is crazy because I think he got that job in 1990, and it blew my mind that it had taken that long for that to happen, but it had. And when we met him back then, we didn't get that much time with him, and so I didn't get to really ask him the questions I wanted to. But as I got into my book, which I'm working on, I kind of look back to that day, and I was in LA where he lives in January this year, and thought, I wonder if I could get a hold of Ed and ask him some things, the things I would have asked him 25 years ago. And so I did, and he was really receptive, and we had this incredible lunch, and he told me all these great stories about his life, and that was kind of that. And so Blackout Tuesday, a few months later, when I thought about what I would do that was positive and constructive and sort of related, I was like, oh, of course I know what to do. I'm going to call Ed and just rap with him that afternoon. And then, like I was saying before, the business part of my brain turned on and was like, well, I should also try to pitch it somewhere and make it into a thing and put a spotlight on him, and of course my writing and everything. And so that, again, luck and timing and being in the right place, I emailed an editor at the Times who I don't know and just said, kind of told a shorter version of the story I just told you, and said I'd love to talk to him. She said, great, talk to him tomorrow. We're going to run it this week while it's still in the news cycle. And that terrified me because everything else I've pitched has always been like, okay, I've written this piece, I've really honed it down, I've shown it to one or two kind of writer friends who've given me some comments, and now it's ready to show to an outlet and say, hey, will you run this? And this was the opposite. This was, hey, I have an idea, I want to talk to this guy and write about it for, one of the biggest papers in the world. And they said, great, it's due in 48 hours. And so that led to the conversation. But I mean, I think going back to BLM and everything that's happening now, this has already been in my head, and it's already been in my writing, and now it's exciting because it's more out there in the world and people are more open to it. You can see the bestseller list is insane, and it's great.
So overdue.
It's crazy, yeah. So I think it's less propelling it, but I'm really excited that it's happening, and I'm happy to be some small part of it.
Yeah, I don't, at the risk of being prescriptive, especially around something as charged as the racial injustice in our country, yeah. I want to, if I can excavate that, the piece of just doing you, like the fact that you've been working on this and writing about your mixed race heritage, your like unpeeling the onion or whatever we've talked about. You've been working on that for X number of years, and then this is a moment where the market has come to you. And if I don't want to again tie the market to a movement of racial justice, but if you use the example of the New York Times list as the market, then like that to me is there's again, take the context away just for a moment and look at you focusing on you, and at some point the market pays attention to you, and it will probably happen several different times across a variety of subjects. This was true for me as a photographer. Action sports was not cool when I started taking pictures of me and my friends skateboarding and surfing. No one could give two shits.
Right.
And then the SUV companies started marketing this outdoor sort of action sports lifestyle to sell shit.
Right.
And in the course of like 5 years, I 10x'd my income.
Wow.
By doing the exact same thing I was doing 5 years ago.
Right. And that's a huge thing that, going back to music again, I mean, people ask me all the time, here's my band, can you give me some advice? And it's always such a weird one for me because my advice is always like, do you like what you're doing? And the answer is usually yes. It's like, great. Got to keep doing it and figure out a way to get in front of people. But, if you're looking for advice that's like change the songs or more guitars or whatever, that's I don't have that advice. You need to hope that people come around to what you're doing, and the most control you can have over that is to just keep doing it and get better at it.
Yeah. And double down on you, like, yeah. Right? That's because that's really what you've done.
I guess so.
Related, slightly different. You have spent a lot of time around people who have pursued their passions and created a living and a life that they have desired. And are there lessons that you can share? I mean, let's take your story out of it for a second. You as a record, you as a record executive, looking at the lives of people who have poured their heart and soul on the stage or the page or on the screen, and any takeaways from that?
And the biggest one is that every single one of those people that I can think of has taken risks and put themselves out there. And it's easy to look at them once they're doing well or once there's crowds or once there's records or whatever. But every one of those people had a first show. Every one of those people had a show where people booed or only 3 people came or they felt they were terrible or others felt they were terrible. I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who does anything interesting who doesn't have that experience. And you have to get through that and you have to keep going, and it's what makes you better at what you do. And that's everyone I know would say that.
Have you had conversations with these folks about any that you can share?
I'm trying to think about, I actually can't think of any, obviously. I'm sure I have, but
the fact that you were confident in being able to say it and feel it, that tells us enough. And I think that there's a takeaway in there, right? Like, yeah. And again, people in the comment section right now it's a great reminder that, oh my God, you mean Grimes had a show that was her first show?
Oh, right.
Of
course she did. Yeah.
Exactly. But that concept is so far removed from our psychology that we've like literally forgot it.
Right. And even when we put out our first Grimes record, which was Vision, she was years into her career, and that album did really well, but people thought, oh, she's an overnight success. And she had worked so hard and done so many cool things before we were even involved. She did what she did, and we helped amplify it. And that's, again, people don't always see that part of someone's career, but it's usually there. And, there are very few people who just pop up and are in the right place at the right time. And it does happen, but it's not a good plan.
Have you ever felt pressure? I'm reading a comment right now from Tony Veronica. She's saying, thank you so much for this. We need to stop comparing ourselves. It can quickly turn from inspiring to defeating if you're looking at where someone else is at some juncture in their career. But she continues on here. It's a rather long comment. And ultimately what it comes around to is, what about like this concept of settling into a career and to a family relative to your dreams? You've talked about your wife, AJ, and what role has the family or circle of friends played in either promoting, hindering, motivating, decoupling your identity with, like, what role have your friends and family played in your either your success or struggling because you're worried about what they think?
Right. I mean, my wife's played a huge role, and she's incredibly talented, smart, ambitious, and around the same time all this was happening, when I was starting to write, not only was she encouraging, but she made this massive career shift where she had a real job, and I think she'd just gotten a raise, and it was the first time in her life when she felt like she could save a little bit of money, and she got interested in money, oddly, for that reason, because she realized that a lot of her friends couldn't give her advice on what to do. And it's a long story. She started this amazing podcast called Money Splained, and one thing led to another. And 2 years later, she's a certified financial planner with her own firm, with her friend who's a CPA, and they're killing it. And and she just went and did that with no one else pushing her, no one asking her to do it. She quit her job. She did so. So again, did I gravitate toward her the night that I met her because I saw all of that in her? Probably, in some way. So it goes back to your thing about kind of community and who you spend your time with. I'm kind of forgetting the
no. It was just like, is that is a non-traditional, and I'm saying this, I'm checking myself while I'm saying this, relative to the experience that we are conditioned to understand socially and culturally in our country. The fact that at 40-something years of age, you could switch careers or add a new career, maybe is not even switch because you're still an executive at 4AD, and like this is a new paradigm, and I'm wondering if like you feel resistance to this, or does it feel natural to you? And for anyone, I was wondering if you had some advice for anyone who is feeling that, wait a minute, how do I reinvent myself at 42? Right. It's not just like I got, kids and, responsibilities and a mortgage. And, these are stories that we tell ourselves. In part, they might be true, but the hurdles that they're, are they real hurdles? Are they just in our head? What's your philosophy?
I mean, I guess they're both. They're real hurdles and they're in your head. I mean, kids certainly make a difference. I don't have kids, and I don't know if I would have been able to do the things I've done with kids. Kids obviously take time and money, which are two big things. And so it's to go back to the sort of not quitting my job, but rather starting to do things. So yeah, to your point, I haven't had a career shift. To me, I'm still very much a record executive. I have this great job at 4AD. I love it, and that's what I want to continue to do. At the same time, I got to get my feet wet and publish one little thing and then publish another little thing and turn it into a bigger thing, all the while working my real job, and then turned it into a book, which, a big publisher's going to publish, which is just crazy to me. It still blows my mind that's a thing and that someone else read this and decided that was a good idea. The world obviously still has to see it. We'll see. And of course there's still fear of that, but it's the thing I think is it's you don't need to stop what you're doing to do something else. I think that's a huge thing. It might take you a little longer to do the new thing if you're unable to stop, but you don't have to quit your job to start your art practice or your music practice or whatever. You can write music, you can get up an hour earlier every morning, you can stay up late every night, you can spend time on the weekends recording. Music's a harder one, because, well, until now, so much of it required touring, being on the road, especially when you're smaller. It's the best way to build it is to play live. But now suddenly there's a level playing field. So maybe now's a great time if you want to be a musician to figure out, whatever it is, learn the recording program, and you can learn all this stuff online on YouTube and start writing music and start selling it. You could do that. It's,
You're clearly a multi-hyphenate, right? This is a thread that has been very consistent in our conversation over the past hour. I'm curious, how do you describe yourself at parties? What do you do? Hey, Bill, what's up? Good to meet you, man. So what's your gig? What do you do?
Right. I mean, I would generally, depending on the party, I would say I run a record company. That's my general line. And I just put it that. And I'm also, I think I'm a bit humble in situations like that and tend to maybe brag less than I even could or should, but I would never say, oh, I run a record company and we're putting out all these great records, and I also just had an article in the New York Times and have a book coming out or whatever. I would never run through the thing. I think I still identify very much as a record company guy.
And is that safe? Why do you do that?
Oh, well, it's true. It's the thing I've done the longest. It's, I guess it's safe, but it can also lead to other things because still most people generally don't know what that is, which is always a surprise to me. It's always like, oh, so you're a record producer. No, I'm not a record producer. Producer is the person who's actually in the studio recording the records, which is not what I do. It always goes. Maybe I should just say I'm a writer. Maybe from this conversation on.
This is why I'm asking.
Right.
And I think it's a conversation that so many of us have in our heads. Like, what am I now? And for me, it was the opposite. I started calling myself a photographer before I was legitimately like established in that world as almost like a signal to the universe.
Right. That's an important thing to do, though. That makes sense. If you know you want to get somewhere, then make it happen. That's part of it. Just believing it and putting that out there.
Ash Jensen from Facebook wants to know if you have a few favorite musicians and a few favorite mentors that you respect and or look up to.
In general, let me think. I mean, I'm a huge fan, it's not a musician in particular, but of the band Bad Brains, who is a
legend.
Late 70s, early 80s punk band from Washington, D.C. for black men, which was very interesting at the time, and I guess still is now, oddly. And I think the reason I look up to them, I mean, they're one of my favorite bands of all time, and I love the music, and I love the politics and everything about it. But what's really interesting to me is that I think they did something that I needed at the time. I'm a product of really early MTV, like early 80s, and so I was into whatever, Van Halen and Motley Crue, but also the Human League and kind of all the new wave bands that they were playing. And to me, I didn't see the line that existed between new wave and metal, which was a thing in the early 80s MTV, because they played those two kinds of music. But to me, they just played music. Mm-hmm. And, Nirvana gets a lot of the credit for fusing different styles, which they absolutely did, and Jane's Addiction before them. But I think Bad Brains was kind of the band, at least for me, that brought together a bunch of different things, and obviously with this huge race element, but kind of showed me that you could mix a bunch of things and bring a bunch of people together musically. So that's my musical one. On a personal, or I guess maybe even business mentor level, I mean, I don't have anybody famous. I had a really amazing internship in college at Polygram Records. There was a woman named Steph who, was a record person in Seattle who I worked for. And she was great in a bunch of ways. I mean, I learned a ton about the record business from her, and that was sort of my first experience there. But she was also just a really good person. And I remember the way she treated people when we went to record stores, and even people who were difficult to deal with. She was great at dealing with them. And I remember one particular thing she told me, because I met so many people in that job. She's like, when someone doesn't understand your name, Nabil, you need to say it again. And you say, hey, I'm Nabil. And if they say, what? You say, Nabil. It's an Arabic name, Nabil. And she's like, then you've said it 3 times. And I remember that line specifically, but that was a really interesting thing that from that day on, I paid a lot more attention to. And it's good to have people like that.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Bad Brains, what was the name of the track that I think the singer, the rumor had it that the singer sang that from prison?
Sacred Love, yeah, I think it's true. It's a really crazy story. He, while they were recording that album, Eye Against Eye, there's a documentary on that album. So the producer, Ron St. Germain, I think they're almost done with the vocals, and he said, yeah, we actually got to get done today because I have to go serve 60 days for a cannabis charge tomorrow. And they're like, what? You didn't tell us this. He's like, yeah. So let's run the vocals now before I have to go. And they got everything done except for that song. And so they figured out a way for him to do it over the payphone from prison. And when you listen to it, you can hear it sounds like, scratchy and different.
Oh, but it's such like that is, to me, that epitomizes punk and DIY and that ethos of like, no, we're going to make what would typically be a bug. We're making that a feature. You know what I mean? Like that, the through the telephone.
Yeah.
And for those of you, if you're not familiar with that, you need to go check that out right now. Sacred Love, Bad Brains.
Pretty incredible story.
Incredible. My man, I keeping you longer than I promised, just because I don't want to let you go. We haven't hung out in a long time.
This is great. This has been super fun. We even got rid of the dogs.
I want to spend the last few minutes talking about your upcoming book. I think the folks who are listening and yours truly are very happily seduced by your writing, your art, the way that you've just built an amazing life arc, and to have that captured in a book that you've written, I hope I'm getting an advanced copy. We'll have you back on the show. We're good at moving. We're good at moving some units.
It's fun.
But tell us a little bit about the journey of getting a major publisher to write to publish your memoir, and then what can we expect from it?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes along the same path to where I'd written, published, whatever, 5 or 6 pieces, and at the same time had tons and tons of writing that hadn't been published. That was lots of personal stuff, and in a way, it was very compartmentalized, meaning like I can write all these stories about the bands I was in. I can write all these stories about my childhood. I can write all these stories about race. I can write these stories about the record store. And then I started to realize that there's enough stuff here that I bet I could make it into a memoir, make it into the story of my life, I guess, for lack of a better term, and talk about something. Why would anyone want to read this? I mean, those feelings when you're just doing start to finish your life. But I just decided it was something I needed to do. And I think it was sort of a self-challenge. Like, I wonder if I can do this. I wonder if I can make this into something that feels like it has a story and an arc. I mean, you don't want it to just be like, and then this happened, and then this happened. And the arc is really, plays on kind of the first 10 years of my life, which my mother was on welfare, and she was a single mom the whole time. My father never left us. The agreement was she wanted to get pregnant, and he said, fine, I'm not going to be in the picture. And so it's the opposite of the sad, father left kind of stuff. It's very deliberate. My mother's incredible. And so that's sort of where it all starts. And yeah, we're on welfare, and I'm a racially mixed kid and all this stuff. And it's all things that you would look at as very difficult and very disadvantageous, but it wasn't. I had this incredible life and really supportive, nurturing people around all the time. And so I guess the big picture is, despite these sort of hurdles, I've had this wonderful life, and here are a bunch of things that have happened during it. And some of them are really funny to me, some are really sad, but it's all part of the whole thing.
Don't stories need conflict?
They do. I mean, I go to jail.
The plot thickens.
It's not. I guess it's not all good, but I guess my point is more that it's not all bad, even though it sounds like it could be.
Thank you so much for being on the show, bud.
It's been a blast.
What do you have a name for your upcoming memoir? Is it
not settled? I can't say it yet because it could change. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll say that for the next one.
All right. Yeah. Well, now we've sufficiently planted the seeds. We've hooked again people. Justin, Ash, Barbie, Peppa, Dusty Craft, Tony, Gervinder, long list of people expressing a lot of gratitude. We got South Africa came back and said, you gave one shout out to South Africa. I want you to know there are 2 of us on the broadcast. So we got people around the world saying thank you so much for sharing. Sounds like you are a beautiful human, says Ash Jensen.
Wow, Ash, thanks.
Michelle, Valeria. What's the best place if people want to, read more of your writing, see the bands that you're curating and signing? Give us a couple of coordinates on the internet for
just my full name, NabilAyers.com is my website. That's all the writing stuff kind of chronologically listed out. 480.
Nabil for those who are listening rather than watching the broadcast right now.
Right.
Ayers.
Yep. And then for 4AD, which is the record company I work for, that's just the number 4, letter A, letter D as in dog, 4AD.com. And that's, as you mentioned, the National and Grimes and Future Islands and a ton of great bands I'm lucky enough to work with.
Man, I didn't know that you guys did the Pixies reissue, and that, wow.
Well, that was crazy. I mean, all those Pixies albums were on 4AD originally, those first five records. And, that's when, I was in high school listening to them. It's crazy.
Yeah. So influential too.
Yeah. So Doolittle, sort of the biggest one, finally, it took forever, but went platinum, 1 million sales in America last year. And it was incredible to be able to make this Platinum Record Award and actually hand it to the band, who are truly like teenage idols of mine. And it was at Madison Square Garden. I mean, the whole thing was just magical. It was crazy.
This is another look into the inspired and charmed life that you've led. Thanks so much for your time, bud.
Thank you, Chase. It's been great.
I'm grateful to have you on the show. Already looking forward to the next one. Congrats on the book and all the pieces. So inspiring to read what you've written. And thanks for being a good friend.
Thank you. Hope to see you soon in person.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's been too long. But signing off for everyone who's watching, thanks so much for being a part of the show today, for contributing your comments and questions. Very, very thoughtful audience today, and hope you are here with us again soon, maybe even tomorrow.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Chase Jarvis, founder and CEO of CreativeLive. You will know that we have more than 2,000 classes and more than 10,000 hours of learning, inspirational, and motivational content on the platform. I'm super excited to announce a new experience on CreativeLive. It's called Fast Class. You've told us that you're busy and sometimes it's hard to dive into a full class from start to finish. So essentially, we're now giving you a shortened highlight version of our top CreativeLive classes. You can always dive into the full class with 5, 10, 15 hours of great content. But now, if you're just looking to focus on a few of the highlights or want to be able to skip quickly to something that really interests you, you can now get a shortened fast class version of that class. We're also thinking this might be able to help you explore a new craft and save time while doing it. This is a great tool to curate your learning experience to help create the life that you seek. So you're probably thinking, great, how do I access this new experience on CreativeLive? That's easy.